a sepia-toned montage begins. Fading images of antebellum America, bustling northern factories, serene southern plantations, the stark contrast of enslaved labor in fields, the sound of a distant, mournful spiritual swells. Then a sudden, jarring shift. The thunder of cannons, the flash of musketry, the desperate cries of men. Union and Confederate soldiers clash in a maelstrom of smoke and steel. Abraham Lincoln's solemn face emerges from the chaos, superimposed over a tattered yet defiant U.S. flag. The soundscape shifts to a haunting, reflective score. Blood and iron. These elemental forces forged the very soul of a divided nation. The American Civil War, a conflict of unparalleled ferocity, was far more than a mere clash of armies. It was a profound struggle over freedom, power, and the enduring promise of the United States itself. Tonight we embark on a reflective journey, delving into the true story of America's deadliest conflict, a saga that continues to echo through the corridors of our history. Detailed historical maps illustrate the geographical and economic divide. Northern states are depicted with symbols of industry and burgeoning cities, while the South is characterized by vast cotton fields and the stark reality of plantation life. Archival photographs of bustling northern ports, juxtaposed with images of enslaved people toiling under the southern sun. By the mid-19th century, the American experiment, born of revolutionary ideals, found itself irrevocably split. The North, a dynamic engine of industrialization, embraced a future of wage labor, innovation, and burgeoning urban centers. Its economy thrived on manufacturing and commerce, drawing immigrants and fostering a diverse social fabric. Conversely, the South remained deeply agrarian, its prosperity inextricably linked to the vast cotton kingdom. This empire, the bedrock of its wealth and social order, was built upon the brutal foundation of chattel slavery. Millions of human beings were held in bondage, their labor fueling an economic system that defied the nation's founding principles. Slavery, however, transcended mere economics. It was a profound moral chasm that cleaved the nation. The very notion of liberty, enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, stood in stark contradiction to the institution that denied basic human rights to an entire race. This fundamental hypocrisy ignited fierce debates, questioning whether a republic founded on freedom could truly endure while millions remained enslaved. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act were desperate attempts to paper over these irreconcilable differences. Each legislative maneuver, however, only served to deepen the fissures, pushing the nation closer to the precipice. The Dred Scott decision, declaring enslaved people as property with no rights, extinguished any hope of a peaceful resolution, setting the stage for an inevitable confrontation. Period political cartoons and election posters from 1860 flash across the screen, depicting the fractured political landscape. Images of impassioned Southern politicians delivering fiery speeches, followed by scenes of jubilant crowds celebrating secession in Southern cities. The Confederate flag is unfurled for the first time. The year 1860 marked a pivotal turning point, a moment when the fragile bonds holding the Union together finally snapped. Abraham Lincoln, a relatively unknown lawyer from Illinois, was elected president. His platform, though moderate, firmly opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, a stance deemed an existential threat by the Southern states. For many Southerners, Lincoln's victory signaled the end of their way of life, a direct assault on their economic system and social hierarchy. They viewed it as an unconstitutional infringement on states' rights and a prelude to the abolition of slavery itself. The cries for secession, long simmering beneath the surface, now erupted with fervent intensity. Within a mere 3 months of Lincoln's election, 7 Southern states, South Carolina leading the charge, declared their independence from the Union. They swiftly formed the Confederate States of America, drafting their own constitution and electing Jefferson Davis as their president. This act of defiance was a direct challenge to the very concept of a perpetual union. The nation held its breath as the standoff intensified. In April 1861, the simmering tensions boiled over at Fort Sumter, a federal outpost in Charleston Harbor. Confederate batteries under the command of General P.G.T. Beauregard opened fire, initiating a bombardment that lasted for 34 hours. This act of aggression, a direct assault on federal property, irrevocably plunged the nation into war. Chaotic, visceral reenactments or historical illustrations of the First Battle of Bull Run, Manassas. Civilians in carriages are seen fleeing in panic. The grim reality of battlefield dead and wounded is depicted, emphasizing the shock and horror. In the heady days of 1861, a profound naivete permeated both North and South. Many on both sides believed the conflict would be swift, a decisive engagement that would quickly resolve the nation's deep-seated divisions. The romanticized notions of warfare inherited from earlier generations were about to be brutally shattered. The First Battle of Bull Run, fought near Manassas, Virginia, became a stark and bloody lesson in the grim realities of modern warfare. Eager civilians, some even bringing picnic baskets, traveled from Washington, D.C. to witness what they anticipated would be a grand spectacle, a glorious display of martial prowess. Instead, they bore witness to utter chaos, a horrifying tableau of untrained armies clashing with unprecedented ferocity. The Union forces, initially gaining ground, were ultimately routed by a determined Confederate stand, famously led by Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson. The retreat became a panicked scramble, a humiliating spectacle for the Union. The battle's aftermath sent shockwaves through both capitals. The casualty lists were staggering, far exceeding anything previously imagined. Bull Run disabused both sides of any illusions of a quick victory, revealing the true grinding nature of the conflict that lay ahead. It was a brutal awakening, signaling the dawn of a long, arduous, and devastating war. A split-screen montage. Ulysses S. Grant, resolute and determined, contrasted with Robert E. Lee, stoic and aristocratic. Archival footage or detailed illustrations of key battles, Antietam's bloody cornfield, Shiloh's chaotic woods, Gettysburg's climactic charge, maps illustrating strategic movements and troop deployments. As the war intensified, the fortunes of both sides became inextricably linked to the leadership of their commanding generals. The Confederacy placed its unwavering faith in Robert E. Lee, a Virginian aristocrat and brilliant tactician, whose strategic genius would become legendary. Lee, though personally opposed to secession, felt an unyielding loyalty to his home state, choosing to defend it against the Union. The Union, after a series of early command struggles, ultimately found its champion in Ulysses S. Grant. A man of quiet determination and relentless resolve, Grant understood the brutal arithmetic of total war. He was willing to endure heavy casualties, knowing that the North's superior resources and manpower would ultimately prevail. His strategy was one of attrition, a grinding pressure designed to crush the rebellion. The clash of these titans and the armies they commanded produced battles of unprecedented scale and horror. Antietam, in September 1862, remains the single bloodiest day in American military history, a horrific testament to the destructive power of rifled muskets and massed formations. The cornfield, the sunken road, and Burnside's bridge became indelible symbols of sacrifice. Shiloh, fought in the spring of 1862, shocked the nation with its sheer brutality and the staggering number of casualties. It was a chaotic, two-day struggle that revealed the ferocity with which Americans would fight each other. Gettysburg, in July 1863, marked the high water mark of the Confederacy, a three-day epic that turned the tide of the war in the East, forever etched into the national consciousness. These battles, and countless others, introduced America to a new, terrifying kind of warfare. Trenches, fortifications, and massed artillery became commonplace, transforming battlefields into landscapes of devastation. The human cost was immense, forever altering the lives of soldiers and civilians alike, leaving an indelible scar on the American psyche. A powerful image of Abraham Lincoln, pen in hand, signing the Emancipation Proclamation. Close-ups of the document itself, followed by images of jubilant freed slaves, and then the dignified faces of African-American soldiers in Union uniforms, marching with purpose. The sound of drums in a hopeful yet solemn musical theme. For the first 2 years of the war, Lincoln's primary objective remained the preservation of the Union, often downplaying the issue of slavery to maintain border state loyalty. However, as the conflict dragged on, and the moral weight of slavery became undeniable, Lincoln's perspective evolved. He recognized that striking at the heart of the Confederacy's labor system was both a military necessity and a moral imperative. On January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a revolutionary decree that fundamentally transformed the nature of the war. It declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were thenceforth free. This act, born of both strategic calculation and profound conviction, shifted the war's purpose from merely preserving the Union to a grander, more righteous cause, the abolition of slavery. The proclamation had an immediate and profound impact. It galvanized abolitionists, disheartened the Confederacy, and, crucially, opened the doors for African Americans to serve in the Union Army. Over 180,000 black soldiers, many of them formerly enslaved, eagerly enlisted, forming regiments like the famed 54th Massachusetts. These brave men fought with unparalleled courage and determination, proving their valor on battlefields such as Fort Wagner and Port Hudson. Their service not only contributed significantly to the Union victory, but also shattered racial stereotypes and laid the groundwork for future civil rights struggles. The war was no longer just about states' rights. It was a fight for human dignity and universal freedom. Haunting images of William Tecumseh Sherman, his gaze fixed and unyielding. A visual narrative of Sherman's march to the sea, burning fields, destroyed infrastructure, fleeing civilians, the stark reality of a scorched earth policy. The sound of crackling fires and the distant cries of despair. As the war entered its final, brutal phase, the Union adopted a strategy of total war, a concept designed to break the Confederacy's will to fight by destroying its economic and psychological capacity for resistance. Union generals like William Tecumseh Sherman became the embodiment of this unsparing approach, understanding that victory required more than just defeating armies on the battlefield. Sherman's infamous March to the Sea in late 1864 epitomized this strategy. Leading his army through Georgia, he cut a swath of destruction 60 miles wide, systematically targeting railroads, factories, and farms. His objective was not merely to defeat Confederate forces, but to make the Southern populace howl, to demonstrate the futility of continued resistance. The psychological impact of Sherman's march was immense. It shattered the Confederacy's morale, demonstrating that their government could no longer protect its citizens or its territory. The destruction of infrastructure crippled the South's ability to supply its armies and sustain its economy, accelerating its inevitable collapse. This brutal yet effective strategy sent an unequivocal message. The Confederacy would not survive. The Union was prepared to employ every means necessary to restore the nation, even if it meant inflicting widespread devastation. Total war, a grim innovation of the Civil War, forever changed the nature of armed conflict and left an enduring legacy of bitterness in the South. A poignant depiction of Appomattox Courthouse. Robert E. Lee, dignified in defeat, surrendering to Ulysses S. Grant, respectful in victory. The somber faces of soldiers from both sides. Then a sudden, tragic shift. The interior of Ford's Theater, a single gunshot, and the somber news of Lincoln's assassination. A nation in mourning. By the spring of 1865, the Confederacy was a shadow of its former self. Exhausted by 4 years of relentless warfare, its resources depleted, its manpower dwindling. Grant's relentless overland campaign had bled Lee's Army of Northern Virginia white, culminating in the siege of Petersburg. The end was undeniably in sight. On April 9, 1865, the inevitable arrived. General Robert E. Lee, recognizing the futility of further resistance, surrendered his beleaguered army to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The terms of surrender were magnanimous, reflecting Grant's desire for reconciliation rather than retribution, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home with their horses and sidearms. The surrender at Appomattox effectively marked the end of the Civil War, bringing a close to the bloodiest chapter in American history. The Union was preserved, and the institution of slavery was irrevocably abolished. A weary nation, however, had little time to savor the victory or begin the arduous task of healing. Just 5 days after Lee's surrender, Tragedy struck with devastating force. On April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln, the guiding hand through the nation's darkest hour, was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. His death plunged the nation into profound mourning, leaving a fractured country to navigate the treacherous path of Reconstruction without its visionary leader. A powerful montage, vast fields of graves, rows upon rows of white headstones, a stark reminder of the immense human cost. Images of jubilant freed men and women celebrating their newfound liberty, contrasted with burned-out cities and devastated landscapes. Archival photos depicting the early struggles of Reconstruction, racial tensions, and the enduring divisions. The American Civil War claimed the lives of more than 620,000 Americans, a staggering toll that surpassed all other U.S. wars combined. It was a conflict that tore families apart, devastated landscapes, and left an entire generation scarred by its brutality. The human cost, both physical and psychological, was immeasurable, a wound that would take generations to heal. Yet from this crucible of suffering, profound transformations emerged. The war irrevocably ended the institution of slavery, liberating 4 million people and fundamentally altering the social and economic fabric of the South. It preserved the Union, solidifying the concept of an indivisible nation and affirming the supremacy of federal authority. The Civil War also redefined what freedom truly meant in America, expanding its promise, however imperfectly, to all citizens. However, the war's end did not bring an immediate end to strife. It left deep and enduring scars, racial tensions, regional bitterness, and unresolved questions of power and equality that continue to resonate in American society today. The era of Reconstruction, intended to rebuild the South and integrate freed slaves into the nation, proved to be a tumultuous and often violent period. Its failures laid the groundwork for decades of racial injustice and segregation, demonstrating that the battle for true equality was far from over. The legacy of the Civil War is a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy, liberation and lingering injustice. A slow, reflective pan across the solemn landscape of Gettysburg National Cemetery, rows of gravestones stretching into the distance. The camera focuses on a monument etched with Lincoln's words. The American flag, now whole and vibrant, waves gently in the breeze, but the underlying score retains a poignant, reflective quality. Blood and iron. These were the elements that decided America's future, forging a new nation from the ashes of division. The Civil War was the nation's greatest test, a profound moral and existential struggle fought not merely on battlefields, but within the very heart of what it means to be free, to be American. Its enduring legacy is not just etched into monuments and history books, but woven into the very fabric of our national identity, a constant reminder of the sacrifices made and the ideals still pursued. This is the Scholar's Ledger, where history, faith, and power are revealed. Subscribe, share, and join the search for truth.